Welcome to This is AI, a podcast brought to you by West Monroe. We're going to show you, step by step, how to build, use, and master AI to create the most value for your business.
Well, welcome to the podcast, everybody. We're here to talk about AI, but first, a couple of things to get out of the way. We are West Monroe. We're a digital services firm. We work nationally and internationally in a lot of different industries that you're familiar with, maybe some that you aren't. We have a strong focus on product and exploration, and especially on emerging technology, and that's why we're here talking about AI as a category, generative AI specifically. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun conversation. I'm EJ. I am a director and product leader in our product experience and engineering lab at West Monroe. My experience is primarily in the digital product strategy and product build arena. I've done a ton of work in building mobile apps, web apps, enterprise infrastructure. You name it, I've probably built it. My key focus is really on emerging technology and how do we build a robust portfolio of tools and technologies that our clients can use in their digital products and services.
Hey, I'm Erik Brown, aka Brownie. My background is in software engineering. I've spent most of my career, started my career building distributed systems, largely kind of the back end, nuts and bolts, the gears churning. That's always been a passion of mine. I studied AI in college for the neural networks for the first time in the 90s, dating myself. So, and I've applied machine learning in in a number of projects and a couple of products that I've built. So it's been a particularly exciting couple of years, and I'm happy to be chatting about this a little bit more. I lead engineering within the Pixel practice. Pixel is Product Experience and Engineering Lab. EJ is also a part of it.
Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Elmore, Innovation Fellow here at West Monroe and Head Data Scientist. About 25 years in the AI, ML, data science space. Started my career as an actuary for about 10 years in the insurance space, doing probabilities, predictive analytics, loss models, changed gears, worked at Teradata for a stint, and then been in the consulting game for about 10 years now across multiple industries. Have an undergrad in applied math, master's in data science, and all but dissertation in technology innovation management with AI. So really looking forward to this conversation about generative AI and everything AI as well.
All right. So in this podcast series, we're going to cover a ton of stuff. We're going to talk about things that we're building. We're going to talk about things you should know about. We're going to talk about a ton of stuff, right, Brownie?
We're going to talk about a ton of stuff. It's going to be fun too, right? West Monroe, we run the gamut from building strategies for our clients, helping with complex organizational design and that sort of thing. But the crew on this series is all about building. And I think generative AI gives us a new, very exciting tool in the tool belt to supplement the way we build. And we really want to get into some specific examples of things that we've built that have expanded our imaginations on how we can kind of supplement the products that we're designing and imagining with our clients, right? Maybe talk about some industries that we think can spawn a couple of relevant use cases, right? We're really going to spend a lot of time in the nuts and bolts and showing. Some of you are going to be listening, but if you're in front of a screen, we're going to be showing screenshots. We're going to be showing fewer PowerPoints and more examples of how we can drive interactions with generative AI. So
I love that, Brownie. More showing, less slideware, I think can serve this industry really well. A lot of the conversations happening in the AI and Gen AI space are very conceptual, and I think it'll be really good for folks to hear and see tactical examples of the real use cases that we're going to dig into.
Yeah, if you remember my meme that I posted on LinkedIn with the Spider-Mans pointing at each other, what are you doing? Well, no. Well, what are you doing? And they're all pointing at each other. We're going to get past talking about it and actually build and do.
That's 100%. A great call out, Ryan. And I think that sets up sort of the perspective here on this first episode. We do want to do just a little bit of definition, a little bit of level setting. I know there's probably some fatigue out in the industry right now around generative AI specifically, and everybody talking about what it is and what it isn't. But I think we have kind of a unique take on that. And we'll talk about that in this episode, sort of the category of AI and how generative AI plays a critical part of it in the evolution of that lineage of data and data scientists or data science. One of the important things that I think we'll cover is just a few thoughts on how we're going to address the topic over the coming episodes. So we'll get into that. We'll talk a little bit about how we're having this conversation in the field with our clients, and then also how we're building stuff, internally at West Monroe as well, and why that's so important to engage in a hypothesis test verify methodology to ensure that you're making the right investments on emerging technology and driving the right value. So, I think maybe I'm going to play a little bit of a facilitator role here. I'm going to hand some questions to Ryan and Brownie, and we'll get into the conversation. But I think the first question I'd like to start with is, so Gen AI hit the scene, I think, from a broader awareness perspective, kind of end of last year. And it seems like we're all talking about this now. But Ryan, to your point, maybe I'll start with you. Really, this is a conversation that's been going on for a long time. I mean, certainly decades. But I think, say a little bit about sort of the category of AI and why we're sort of talking about generative AI in the current zeitgeist.
Yeah, so great question. I think where we are today, it stems back to 2018. We had GPT-1 was released. 2019, we had GPT-2. 2020, 21, 22, all those iterations to get us through to where we are today. GPT 3.5, which is ChatGPT, all it really did was add a prompt for us to be able to easily interact. You no longer have to go through an API. And the overall adoption of GPT 3.5 / ChatGPT has gone through the roof. I think we're at 1.5 billion users just by adding a prompt line to be able to interact with it. So that's really where we are today with it, is because it's such ease of use and no longer have to have coding background and Python understanding to be able to iterate. I think that's really why we're where we are today.
So it kind of meshes together this idea that we've been talking about, certainly in the data community for a long time now, the democratization of data, the ability to allow folks that are not engineers or data scientists with specialized training to have conversations. We all know that there's opportunities there with hallucination and other things in the Gen AI space, but to begin to have those more open and accessible conversations with large sets of data through this lineage of GPT sort of evolution and a lot of the other large language models that are out there. And thanks for kind of giving us the overview, and it's a huge spectrum. We'll probably dig into more nuances of the difference between, some of those models you talked about, and the companies that are building them. I know OpenAI is a big name in the industry right now, but there are definitely others out there, and we'll dig into that in some later episodes. But I want to pivot here and maybe go to you, Brownie,
Sure.
and talk a little bit about, what's that space look like as we think about, that lineage of AI as a category and Gen AI specifically. What kind of applications are out there? How do we think about that at West Monroe?
Yeah, and it's important to set that context. Generative AI and ChatGPT is the buzz these days, right? But this is building on ideas and concepts that have begun, that have been around for years, right? A lot of these underpinning AI concepts have been around since the late 50s and early 60s. But ChatGPT and generative AI have been the catalyst that has driven this buzz and interest in AI in general. And I think it's important for us to understand where that came from. So I'm actually, for those that are in front of a monitor, I'm going to bring up a slide and kind of talk through the way we define AI and the different categories of AI. And how they built on each other to drive a lot of the buzz recently.
No, that's fantastic. I think it'll be really good to kind of run through that and make sure that we have that clear definition, that clear understanding, at least from our perspective. I also think it's important to think about how the global community, there's certainly a lot of tech experts that live in this space daily, but there's a global community that is listening to the hype, whether it's through nightly news or digital channels,
Yep.
and really only has access to the tip of the iceberg. They're thinking Chat GPT, they're thinking whatever Gartner's talking about from a hype cycle perspective. I think they were just recently placed generative AI on the peak of inflated expectations, but there's not a lot of dimensionality to that. So let's dig in and kind of pick that apart a little bit.
Yep. So let's define artificial intelligence in general, and that's just this kind of superset of concepts where machines appear to have human-like behavior, right? Our expectation of that has evolved over the years, right? You got 3 gamers, I think, here on the call.
I think so.
But you remember the original 8-bit systems. You heard them talking about, enhanced AI, right? But it really wasn't that impressive because you could figure out exactly how the artificial intelligence was programmed. There were specific instructions and specific ways other objects, right, in the game behaved with you, right? Well, now that's kind of tougher to discern, right? It's more human-like, and that's a good reflection of kind of the evolution of different subsets of AI. So I think it's important as we're talking to our clients to kind of clarify the difference. And there's different scenarios for different subsets of AI that are relevant as well. So machine learning, we go from the initial AI, which is very specific, predictable sets of instructions, to machine learning, which are made of much more complex algorithms and models. They basically allow computers to take in massive amounts of data and be trained to predict outputs based on that data. The way that data is trained, the way the algorithms are applied, it can use that to predict outcomes. So we might take in years and years of sales data and look at the types of customers that have driven the highest lifetime sales value from a historical context, and we can train a model on all that, and it can start to predict what customers or prospects might lead to a higher lifetime value of revenue, right? So that's machine learning. Then we have deep learning, which builds upon machine learning to build neural networks and more complex models that can execute more complex tasks. So these aren't just predicting an output or an outcome based on a bunch of data, but they're performing complex tasks that might include multiple machine learning models and more complex neural nets. So think self-driving cars, right? That's a common scenario. That's applying computer vision. It's being trained on what actions are expected when certain objects are encountered while the car is driving, etc. Slowing down, speeding up, stopping, turning, etc. And then we have generative AI, which builds upon deep learning. So we're using those same concepts, those same types of algorithms, complex neural networks, but instead of performing a complex task, we're creating something net new. It could be an image. It could be a sequence of sound waves. It could be text, and that's what we're seeing with ChatGPT, of course. And I think that is why generative AI has really become a huge catalyst. It's more difficult to really appreciate how these models are interacted with and how they're built, unless you're in the thick of it, right, and building the models yourself. Where ChatGPT was released, 3.5 specifically, and all of a sudden you could have these very natural conversations with an AI model. And it seemed like a human. It seemed magical, right? Now, as a result, that's created this massive interest and confusion around when should we be using generative AI? When should we be using machine learning? And frankly, when is AI not applicable, right? So I think that's the crux of a lot of conversations we're having with our clients. And I think the reason that we're putting this series of quick podcasts together to demystify the types of AI, talk about pragmatic applications of that and the things that we're seeing in different industries.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of give a correlation between the data and the modeling on this slide here. When we talk about kind of traditional machine learning, data science, usually the data is static. If we're predicting stock price, we're predicting weather, we're predicting some linear function along those lines, the data comes in and then we iterate on the models itself. We tried a couple different models, we do some fine tuning, some hyperparameter tuning, and we come up with what the best model is for that. If we look at generative AI, it's kind of the opposite of that, where the model is static. It's pre-trained. Generative pre-trained model is GPT. Now the data is coming in is the non-static piece. It's changing. You can put anything towards it. You can put different categorizations. You can ask it different questions in different ways, but the model stays the same. The data is what changes. So it's kind of a different way of thinking about how machine learning is done.
That's a great clarification, Ryan. I appreciate that. And Brownie, thanks for that sort of like demystifying the category of artificial intelligence. I think to kind of make sure that we're speaking at the right level for the folks who are listening to this podcast, we're going to get a bit nerdy, but we're also going to bring it back to, what does that really mean from a generative AI or an AI perspective? And I think what I'm hearing here from the two of you is there is a suite of tools that any business brings to bear in a modern digital solution, and it is inclusive of traditional data science. It's inclusive of deep learning and machine learning, and it now has a new tool set called generative AI. And I think, Ryan, to your point, a good sort of point of clarification, we think these models have a sort of static data set, and while the pre-trained model it can interact with new and interesting external third-party data sets as well. So we can have really dynamic interactions. We don't have to be limited to some of the kind of common things we've heard, in the news cycle around GPT 3.5 or 4, because only trained up to 2021. Sure, but you can access new and interesting data sets as you leverage these other traditional tools from a machine learning or data science perspective.
And I think this brings up a really important point. A natural question is, we talked about generative AI and ChatGPT being a catalyst, but why is it happening now, right? And a big part of that is we have the data available and the computing power to process, to pull it all together and use that
and
as a base of knowledge, a foundation of knowledge in any interaction, right? Ryan, I'm trying to remember, right? That ChatGPT 3 was based on part of the data set that it used was all of Wikipedia, right? And that was what?
Correct.
1%, 2% of the model?
It was 3% of the entire model was download Wikipedia, drag and drop it into the model, and that was just 3%.
Right. So you hear this term, foundational model, ChatGPT, these LLMs, right? Llama 2. These are foundational models. They have this inherent knowledge of all of Wikipedia and all of this other publicly available data and examples of ways humans would interact with that data. And that's why it's so powerful. You can retrain those models. I equate it to Neo learning how to fly a helicopter in the Matrix just by getting an upload. All of this data is there. So we get that for free. And I think we can supplement that in really creative ways to enhance the knowledge, but we don't have to retrain it on all this data. We take these foundational models, and then we can do things that we'll talk about in other parts of the series, like fine-tuning and RAG, which is another architecture, retrieval augmented generation, right? Where you can interact with other data and supplement that with interactions with a foundational model. That's the stuff that's going to be really compelling, because you take this general knowledge and then maybe teach it or supplement it to have a relevant conversation with respect to healthcare or energy and utilities, right? Or financial services. That's what's super exciting.
Yeah, and you use one word continuously there, which is knowledge, which is to me it's knowledge, but it's not in the way the knowledge of like Neo or the Terminator, understanding and comprehending. It's the when you look at how the model is actually built, it's predicting the probability of the next word based on a sequence of like words in the past. So knowledge, understanding, emotion, those things aren't quite there yet. It's not how the models are built, but the words and the text and the data is there. But just be careful with knowledge and feeling and understanding.
I think that's a great call out, Ryan.
Ryan, I know you're a math geek too, right? And that's what's fascinating to me is all this is it's mathematics, right?
Yeah.
But there's such a huge complex network in these algorithms of different neurons firing based on what question you ask. Statistically, it says, well, I'm going to go this route and we're going to figure out how to use this set of data to respond to that. And all of these are chains of statistical outcomes within the model. It's not emotion, right? Which is why we get less worried about, at least in the near term, the Terminator 2 scenario where the AI takes over the world. But certainly something we need to think about moving forward.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. And I think that's a good clarification. I think the whole concept of probability and content generation with these models is super important, but can also seem super irrelevant for people that are trying to understand use cases in their business or how they can unlock the power of these tools. And I think it's our job on this series to help do a little bit of demystification and help people understand the tool set that they're using and why it's so important to understand how it works so they can effectively leverage it in the suite of tools they have at their disposal when building digital products, when creating experiences either internally in their organizations or externally, or even just using these technologies as a productivity tool in their day-to-day work. So just a couple of things I want to recap and talk a little bit about what folks can look forward to in the coming episodes where we do a much deeper dive. We talked a little bit about our perspective on the category of AI, the fact that even though the news might say generative AI is a solution that you just throw all your data into and magic comes out the other end. That's not true. You're actually working with a suite of tools here, from traditional data architecture to machine learning models to generative AI at specific points to enable really high quality interactions. I think we understand a little bit more around kind of the long lineage of this journey. Generative AI is not a brand new tool on the scene. We've been working with it for years, and the technology and the premise and the foundational understanding has been available for decades. And we're gonna dig deep. So what our listeners can look forward to in upcoming episodes is I think a deeper dive on some of these topics. We'll talk about use cases for generative AI. I have a spicy take on that, and I think people need to stop talking about generative AI use cases. They need to talk about use cases. They need to talk about the jobs to be done, the pain points, the gain opportunities in their products and services and platforms. We'll find the right fit for generative AI in those experiences, but we don't want to establish a limiting belief that we need to think about generative AI specific use cases. It's a wider net, and it's more important to think about it holistically. We have a suite of tools, as you heard Brownie and Ryan talk about on this episode, from traditional data science to structured data to machine learning to generative AI. So we'll talk about how to navigate the use case landmines and what some effective ways to implement this technology in your business are. We'll do a deep dive on some stuff that we've built. We have a really great experience in the healthcare space that leverages all these tools. We do a little bit of Gen AI. We do a little bit of structured data query. We do a little bit of data transformation. We'll talk about that. We'll show it, and we'll talk about the different ways that you can expect to use these kind of technologies depending on the experiences that you're trying to build. We'll also spend some time in an episode talking about the impact of generative AI on software development. So there's a huge opportunity. You've probably heard about it from GitHub Copilot, Amazon Code Whisperer, others out there, to enhance productivity, and it can be done. There's some nuances there, and we'll dig into that a little bit. Where do we see the biggest benefit? How do we see those tools being used most effectively by software developers and engineers? And then we're going to talk about the future and a bunch of other large language models. We'll touch on the cornucopia of stuff that's out there. And I think we might get into our perspective around a tool-based approach versus bespoke built solutions and why they're both important for organizations to consider in their day-to-day business. You're already seeing these tools in the products and experiences that you know and love. You're going to see them more. But how do you create custom bespoke solutions for your clients, for your internal users that enhance your productivity? So a lot of exciting stuff coming up here. I hope you join us on the future episodes. Brownie, Ryan, any parting comments before we sign off?
That just sounds really juicy. I'm excited.
Yeah. There's 220,000 models on Hugging Face. We'll touch half of them. That's our goal.
Excellent. That's in the next 197 episodes of this podcast. We'll dig into those. Well, thank you both for joining me today. I'm really excited for the future episodes, and let's dig in.
Sounds good.